I am, I'm seeing President Clinton. He's laughing a little too much at that line about Larry's idea of disparagement. I am glad to be here and glad to be part of this important conference. It is hard to imagine a more fundamental issue at a more crucial time than the future of capitalism. Start with this. People have worried about capitalism before. In the 1930s, the New York Times went to the Soviet Union and declared that it had seen the future. The central preoccupation of economists in the War Department in the 1940s was planning to avoid what they saw as a nearly inevitable post-war depression. John Kennedy believed during the time that he was President of the United States that it was likely that the United States would be surpassed economically by the Soviet Union sometime in the early 1980s, a view he could have had confirmed by reading the best-selling economics textbook of that moment. Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon launched a policy of opening to China because they believed that the constellation of forces was moving against the United States and the West. In the late 1980s, it was said in every issue of the Harvard Business Review that the Cold War had ended and Japan and Germany had won. So this idea that capitalism is about to fail is one that we have seen before. And yet it has been a triumph of the capitalist system that it has proven remarkably resilient, that it has given rise to what might be called self-denying prophecies, prophecies of doom that lead to adjustments, that lead to repair. Consider what's happened in the last long generation. Child mortality on planet Earth has halved and is about to halve again over the next generation. More prosperity has been created for more people on planet Earth than in any other generation in history. If one looks at inequality in the most fundamental way, income or consumption inequality among all of those on our planet, it has declined more rapidly in the last 25 years than in any 25-year period in human history. The rate at which people die violent deaths is a quarter of what it was in the 1970s, even with all that is going on right now, let alone what was happening in the first half of the 20th century. And where capitalism in its purest form has operated, the results have actually been better than most people realize. If you measure wages in the United States over the last generation, famously, average wages have been stagnant. But you can break that into two pieces. If you look at wages measured in terms of clothing, or wages measured in terms of cars, wages measured in terms of toys, or wages measured in terms of telephones, they have more than doubled over the last generation. That is, the number of hours of work it takes to buy a car has halved, or a certain quantum of toys, or a certain quantum of clothing. Why then have wages been stagnant? Wages have been stagnant because of what's happened to the price of housing, what's happened to the price of health, what's happened to the price of education, and what's happened to the price of scarce natural resources, food and energy. Each areas that are very important, but each areas where the fundamental issue is not the productivity of functioning businesses. Where the economic environment has permitted companies to compete, innovate, and strive to satisfy customers, the results for everyone, for poor people, for middle-class people included, have actually been remarkably good over the last generation. Indeed, in the United States, if you look at the chance that children each have their own bedroom, the chance that a house has a TV set, the chance that a place where people live is air-conditioned, the chance that a vehicle is owned. On all of those measures, the status of the poverty population today is better than the status of the median income family in the 1970s. And so, when we want to understand what is most fundamental, how this system is delivering for middle-class people, we need to focus not so much on improving corporate performance and improving the rate at which automobiles are produced or the ways in which clothing is produced more effectively. But instead, we need to look at what has become steadily more expensive and steadily in less satisfactory outcomes. Education, healthcare in many ways, housing. Now, there is room for much debate as to how capitalism can better adjust to meet those challenges. Part of the answer in education surely is the marshaling of technology. I suspect my friend Mark Andreessen exaggerates when he says that most education will be delivered online in 20 years. But anyone who has worked with education will see that technology offers in education something that very rarely comes together. On the one hand, there's the possibility of vastly greater scale. One teacher reaches 100,000 or 500,000 students. At the same time, though, much more personalization is also possible. A student in my class does not have the option of asking me to repeat the last 2 minutes of a lecture, but a student online does. A student in my class today answers a set of problems. The same set of problems are answered by all the students. Not anymore. The students, the math test will give addition and subtraction problems, and the kid who's good at addition will get a lot of subtraction problems, and the kid who's good at subtraction will get a lot of addition problems. So on the one hand, there's much that technology is going to be able to do. On the other hand, there are things that technology is not going to be able to do. It is still going to take one teacher, 1 hour, to provide a personal classroom experience to 15 students. And the price of that educational experience relative to everything else is going to steadily go up, and that is going to put pressure on the not-for-profit and the public sector. In the same way, in healthcare, much, much more is going to be possible. Indeed, in some ways, you can argue that we don't really have healthcare inflation at all. After all, if I asked anyone in this room, which would you prefer for your family? 1975 healthcare at 1975 prices, or 2014 healthcare at 2014 prices? I think most of us would choose 2014 healthcare at 2014 prices. And yet, now that these technologies are possible, there is going to be more and more pressure that they be utilized. How we handle healthcare costs, which in every country in the world are much more public sector involved than most of what goes on in the economy, is a second part of the challenge of adapting to a changing structure of our economy. Housing. Yes, in the United States today and in many other countries, we are going through housing busts. But the longer-term trend is towards higher and less affordable cost housing, particularly in major urban centers. The policy that is probably most clearly right and receives least attention relative to its importance in policy debates is the reduction in restrictions on housing and building vertically in urban areas around the world. More supply offers the potential for many more people to be able to pursue their dreams, and also bringing down prices and thereby reducing inequality. We need to understand that just as agriculture was a central part of our economy in the 1800s, but by virtue of its success, it is still central, but now much smaller. Just as illumination, the production of light, was central and important. Candle making was an important occupation in the 1800s, but it is today small. Something similar is happening in manufacturing today. China has gained competitiveness more rapidly than any country in the world ever will. And there are fewer people working in Chinese manufacturing today than there were in the early 1990s. Already in the United States, less than 1 in 20 workers is a production worker in manufacturing, and the trend will continue downwards. And so the challenge is less to further optimize what is already doing extraordinarily well than to address those much more challenging sectors that I have referred to. Second large challenge, financial stability and sustainable prosperity. During the now just over 30 years that I have taught macroeconomics, we have seen the Latin American debt crisis, the 1987 stock market crash, the 1989 S&L crash, the 1990 real estate problem, the breaking of the pound in 1991, the 1994 Mexican crisis, the 1997 Asian crisis, the 1998 Russia LTCM crisis, the 2000 bursting of the internet bubble, and then the Great Recession. Works out to one major financial crisis every 3 years in which a financial system whose purpose is to distribute and contain and minimize risk has proven to be a major source of risk, leading to the disruption of the lives of hundreds of thousands of people who think that put is a verb rather than a financial security. That is not an acceptable way for the world to operate. And yet, at the same time that that is true, we face a very serious problem today. And that is that for a whole variety of reasons, deleveraging, slower population growth, the desire of foreign central banks to hold huge volumes of reserves, reductions in the price of capital goods, it seems that the interest rates that are necessary to bring investment into equality with savings at full employment are very, very low. And when you have such low interest rates, there is the inherent risk, the greater inherent risk of bubbles, of Ponzi finance, of financial accidents. This is what I've referred to as the new secular stagnation. The idea that in order to get to full employment, we need interest rates so low that it may not be feasible because nominal interest rates can't fall below zero, or if it is feasible, will be associated with very substantial financial instability. What is the answer? I do not believe the answer is ever easier financial conditions on an unlimited basis. Nor do I believe that tight financial conditions with nothing else changed will be consistent with full employment. Rather, what we need is a combination of measures that promote both public and private investment, along with measures that promote financial stability and that make financial institutions safe for failure. As I've put it in an American context, does anyone in this room think that we should be proud of Kennedy Airport in the United States? If a moment when we can borrow money for the long term in a currency we print ourselves at below 2.5%, and a moment when the construction unemployment rate is in double digits, is not the moment to fix Kennedy Airport, I don't know when that moment will ever come. And infrastructure is not just about bricks and mortar. I've used that line about Kennedy Airport a lot, and as one might expect, eventually the guy who was in charge of the Port Authority called me to explain to me how it was a little more complicated. And it is indeed a little more complicated, but I did figure out to ask him the right question. I said, "Tell me about your air traffic control system." And he confirmed what I knew, which was that our air traffic control system relies on vacuum tubes, like in the kind of TV they had before the flat screen ones. Actually, like the kind of TV they had back when TVs were black and white. And then he said something that I didn't know. He said that when it gets really crowded, they have to use little yellow stickums to keep track of the planes. Little yellow stickums. Think about that the next time you fly. Think about that in terms of all the energy that's used as everybody circles. There's example after example where we are short on infrastructure investment. There's a bridge right near my office in Harvard Square. It's not a very big bridge. It's probably 80 yards long. They are now in their 4th year of fixing that bridge. I said to them, this is a complicated project, this bridge. I know it's a complicated project. On the other hand, World War II was kind of a complicated project too. And it only took 3 years and 8 months from the time we entered till the time we won. Surely we can find ways of reducing barriers to moving this investment along, and that will mean higher interest. That will mean more investment, the capacity to have more reasonable interest rates, which in turn contribute to financial stability. It's infrastructure for the supply side in the long run, but for the demand side and for employment over the next 5 to 10 years. And the third challenge, and this one I believe is the most important if you look over the next generation, whether you've got European-style capitalism, American-style capitalism, or Asian-style capitalism, is what technology is going to mean for the average worker. It is not true that innovation always makes more employment. There is nothing in economic theory that says that that must be true. To see that there's nothing in economic theory that says that that must be true, ponder this. Horses are just as productive as they ever were. And yet, the number of jobs that there are for horses in the economy is a very small fraction of what they once were. This is not just about the future. In 1965, 1 in 20 men in the United States between the ages of 25 and 54 is not working. We're not working. Today, 1 in 6 men in the United States between the ages of 25 and 54 is not working. And reliable statistical extrapolation will show that with the greatest cyclical recovery you can possibly imagine, 1 in 6 will go to 1 in 7 and trending upwards. It is already happening that we are seeing less and less opportunity for what average people with lacking certain skills, are going to be able to do. And the challenge is going to be to find effective ways for them to work, to find satisfaction in their achievements. Part of the answer surely lies in education. Part of the answer surely lies in the kind of public investments that I spoke about. Part of the answer lies in channeling that technological change so that it reinforces the abilities of all, not just levers the abilities of those who are most able. But that is going to be the largest challenge for capitalism going forward. And the first step is to recognize it. There is nothing in the logic of the market or human experience to suggest that it must necessarily be so that there will be jobs for all at socially acceptable wages, no matter how technology evolves. And it is that reality to which the market is going to have to adapt itself. Now, a final thought. What about the role of business in all of this? the great successes that I described at the beginning were successes of business. Business has a capacity to innovate and a capacity to get things done that no other form of human organization has been able to match on a continuing and sustained basis. Traditionally, business has always felt a responsibility to its location because it has had a stake in the success of the place where it is headquartered and the place where its workers live. The challenge, as we move to an ever more globally integrated world, is for business to continue to feel that same stake in places and in communities. The temptation for a few, which then puts pressure on the many, will be to pit jurisdiction against jurisdiction, seeking the best deal, the least restriction, and the least call for responsibility. We have seen much of that already in the tax area. The share of corporate profits taken by tax authorities around the world is probably little more than half of what it was 40 years ago. And the reason is a basic process of competition, a basic ability to move business activity or to use accounting tricks to move income to low tax jurisdictions, which in the first place reduces taxes, and in the longer run reduces tax rates and brings about competition. How business is able to recognize its common stake in a system that works with respect to jobs for all, with respect to financial stability, with respect to getting things done effectively in the sectors where business hasn't traditionally led. These are the questions that are going to determine how inclusive capitalism is for the remainder of this century. Thank you very much.